Welcome to the Thrive Show, where we offer you practical advice that can be implemented into your daily spiritual lives to help you build a thriving home and a thriving sphere. Thanks for joining us.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Thrive Show. I've got two guests here today, and we're going to be talking about a subject that I think you can really fall in one of three perspectives on. We're talking about reaching other people for Christ and having faith-based conversations. And typically, like I said, you'll fall in one of three categories. You'll fall in that category of, I don't like doing it at all. Or you'll fall in the category of, I'll do it with people I'm close with. I'll do it with my friends and family. Or maybe you think, it's not for me with my friends and family. I would rather talk to people who I don't know that well. And I've got a couple people who are good at both of those last two perspectives. And I just want to give them a chance to introduce themselves before we jump into conversation. So go ahead.
I'm Nate. I'm a senior at Norwell High School.
I'm Jaden. I'm a junior at Norwell High School, and I play tennis for the tennis team.
He's pretty good. He's pretty good. And so I think that Nate, you are somebody who, whether it's through putting on an event at the church where you'll bring 40, 50 students to come in and just hear a message and give them an opportunity to respond to the gospel, or we're on a trip and you're having conversations with 100 new friends that you've made on the trip, and they're all faith-based conversations. Those are things you really do well. Why do you think that is?
Probably because I kind of let go of the idea that really anything anything outside of God won't matter after I die. So just the ability to be able to talk to people kind of came from me letting go of that whole, well, they're not going to like me if I say this. Well, if they don't like me because I am professing my love for God, then what am I supposed to do about that? So, and I really enjoy it. I really enjoy talking to people. It's always been a thing that I love to do. So just once I became a follower of Christ, it just kind of expanded on that.
Yeah, and that's really good because you're a type of person who can talk to anyone about anything, I feel like. Mm-hmm. And that's a really big advantage, I would say, to having those kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
How do you go from a stranger, you have a faith conversation with them, to now they're in your phone contacts and you're having more conversations with them and they actually even become a friend? How does that happen?
Really, a faith conversation is one of the deepest conversations you can ever have with someone. And a lot of the times you'll want another one, or you'll want to know how they're doing in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And so I usually do end up finding a way to contact somebody afterwards. And then you really do grow a lot closer in knowing where each other is spiritually, because that unlocks a lot of stuff that's going on in their lives that they're willing to talk about. So just like having the want to like catch up with them and stuff, I usually ask for their phone numbers and then we'll start texting and become friends.
Yeah. What's one example of somebody who you have become friends with and it was because of a random conversation you had started having with somebody?
A really good friend I have, his name's Brandon. He came to the first event that I held at church. I had no idea who he was. I talked to him about how he let go of, he never had social media and how it benefited his life so much. And I was really inspired by that because social media is crazy. And so I asked for his number. I sent him a text. He actually didn't respond to me for like 2 months. And then I invited him to the next one. And then we actually got into a deeper conversation about our sin and about struggles with that. And we meet up every now and again. We talk. We ask each other how we can be praying for each other all the time. And it's just a really good relationship that I have from that.
For sure. And Just one more quick question is like, what would you say to somebody who is nervous to do that? To say like, I don't know about having conversations with somebody I don't know. Where do you even start?
Like where would you start with a conversation?
Yeah.
Honestly, find a common ground. Say they have a cool shirt on. Say I like your shirt. Start talking about their shirt, and then next thing you know, you're talking about what they had for breakfast that day, and then what they did yesterday, and so that's what I find to be the easiest way to start a conversation is to just find a common ground before you go and assume you're going to talk about this, you're going to talk about that. You find something that you can talk about with them right off the bat, so you can get, a common understanding of what they're like, how they talk to you,
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And Jaden, kind of the opposite, and not that you don't do that, but like, I don't know that I've ever seen somebody who is as good at saying, okay, we are friends and I'm going to have a faith conversation with you, even if it's like a super hard conversation. Maybe you'd probably agree with this, that harder conversations need to happen amongst friends. And it's not always going to be like I don't know you, but you're living in sin. Like it's normally like you need to have a friendship with that person before you have those deeper level conversations.
Yeah, I would agree 100%, because if you try to have a super deep, like faith-based conversation with somebody who's not like hasn't been introduced to faith yet, they're not going to understand it. So if you try to call out their sin, even if it's in a loving way, they may resent you for that because they won't understand. They won't understand why it's an issue.
Yeah, and that's another really good perspective of like, you do good whether they're your friend and they are a Christian or whether they aren't a Christian. And how do you bring in a faith conversation to somebody you're close with or you're friends with, even at a surface level, who doesn't know Christ?
Typically what I try to do is I'll just find, again, like common ground. Like a lot of my faith-based conversations don't start off like that. Like sometimes a lot of them are just spontaneous, but how a lot of them typically start is sometimes it's even them like making a joke about like God or something, and then I'll be like, hey, it's like, what are your thoughts on God? Like, do you actually believe what you just joked? Or like, do you actually believe in God? Like, what do you believe in? So then based on their answer, then I kind of go into like, well, I believe this. And then I kind of talk about what I believe, how I see things. And I would say like, what are your thoughts on that stuff? And it just goes back and forth from that point. And then it's like, I try to see things from their point of view, I guess, so I can better understand them.
Right. And what about somebody who is already a Christian? What are some easy or practical methods you use to like, hey, this is how I can just naturally have a conversation with them?
Yeah, a lot of people that I actually, are really good that I'm really good friends with that are already like deep in their faith and stuff. What I typically do is if I have a question or if I just want to know what their thoughts on it, I'll just ask them right out of the gate, because I know that they have their faith. I know I have my faith, and I just want to see again what their perspective is on it, because have been a lot of times where I've been wrong on a topic, and me asking somebody like, hey, what do you think about this, has changed my perspective. And I think it's just helpful and fruitful for both people to like find common ground in what they believe in stuff. For sure.
And that's another really good point is, and I'll just have you elaborate more on this. It's the statement that it's so important to hear them before you put out any content. Like for both sure. Of you, we can all say something. Talk a little bit more on that.
I guess like what's the specific question?
Just the whole point that it's so important to let them talk before you just say something. Yeah,
because if you just talk without knowing anything about that person, like you could strike a bad nerve. And like from my experience, I've never done something like that, because again, I've made it a priority to let them speak, because I don't know where they come from. They could be in like in an abusive home, dealing with like drugs, suicidal thoughts. If I say something along the lines of like talking about something along like the lines of suicide, anxiety, like depression, something that they might be struggling with, then like again, that might strike a bad chord, and they might resent me and get mad at me for that. So I need to know like, I try to figure out what they're kind of going through to help me process better. Like, okay, well, what can I actually say to them that's actually going to make a difference, and not just spout off, the stereotypical verses that are encouraging,
Right.
Yeah, you can't really have scripture prepared for someone you've never met. And so, like you
good.
said, knowing them, knowing what they're going through, and not just assuming what they're going through, you could really, like you said, you could strike a nerve. You could really make them mad, make them resent you. And so, knowing what they're going through and just letting them talk before you really say anything is really important, because again, you can't provide scripture for someone that you don't know.
That's really good.
And so it gives you another chance to like follow up with them with scripture that you think will help in the situation.
Yeah. That's really powerful. I like that a lot. And I would say this is true for, having conversations with strangers, but especially true for your case scenario of talking to people who are friends is, and we've had a lot of these conversations, so talk more on this, is it's so important to get wisdom from other Christians about, okay, how do I handle this situation, or what do I do about this? Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for me, I'm always looking for growth opportunities, because again, I know that I'm not always going to be right. Like, that's just a fact. And that's how it's going to be for everybody as well. And because, God is infinite, so there's always something else you can learn. So like, I try to never become content with where I'm at in terms of my relationship with God. Like, I never just want to sit back and be like, all right, I know enough. I don't want to be like that. I want to know as much as I can and keep learning. So
That's good.
The best way to do that for me, I've found, is, people that are older than me, have been in their walk of faith longer than I have experienced more stuff than I have. Talking and getting insight from those people is just extremely beneficial for me.
That's good. That's really good. Same thing for you as well, or?
Yeah. I know for a fact that I know a lot of people that have been in their walk with God a lot longer than I have. And so, always going back and being like, okay, is this right? Before I say this is okay? Going to the Bible for that, going to other people that are a lot more spiritually mature than I am. Kind of just give that second approval before you go say anything that you might regret later. And just giving you advice on what to say is really important, because like sometimes I just will be at a point where I'm just like, I don't know. And that's not really a sufficient answer in some conversations. So being able to go to people, being able to just like get what they know and take what they know and kind of just reiterating it to someone else is really.
Yeah. And Nate, just kind of going back to your perspective, is like, that's kind of how God really entered your life, was through random people. Like, I remember one time we were having a conversation where, we were talking about like, what is it that kept you coming to youth group?
Yeah.
And it wasn't like I heard Taylor's message and it was amazing, because that's not true, right? It was the people just came up to me and said, hey, and the people came up to me and they cared about what was going on in my life. And I think like in both case scenarios, that is so important. Like, before we come at them with scripture or have the right verse, it's so important to just show them that you're there for them no matter what, and that you love them regardless. Maybe don't share a name, but just share a story about a time where that has been true in your life.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Just how it's so important to start with a relationship and say, hey, look, I'm here for you no matter what, before I even bring in scripture.
For sure, because I've talked to this one person specifically where they were heavily dealing with like suicide. So it was me texting them like every day, like, hey, how's today going? Like checking up on them. And again, presence is so powerful. Like, you don't need to be shoving scripture down their throat 24/7 to be making a difference. Presence is incredibly powerful, and just letting that person know that you're there for them makes a difference. And I believe it did, because with that person, slowly over time, that person, they noticed like he's coming back and he's checking on me, like he cares. There's something different, like, because that person, they had expressed to me that nobody else was like that. Nobody else had done that for them before. So they looked at me and they saw something different in me, and like that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. And a story maybe from you as well.
Yeah. So over the summer, everything for our school had ended, and I was talking to this person, and they were, they were far from God, but they had a relationship with God. and a lot of their problems were that nobody was really listening to them, and nobody was there. And so I guess I knew that just being there to provide that certain like listening ear, really that's all it took, was that listening ear, and that checking up on them was really all they needed. And so now they're starting to, I've noticed this school year, they're starting to come to our campus life, our ministry based stuff, which I think is really cool.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I think it's, I mean, even if you look at Jesus's life, like he usually would address the physical need before he would address the spiritual need. Like before he saves a guy, he heals his hand. Or the woman who came to know Christ, she touched his robe and she was healed, and then she believed, right? Like it's so true that like Jesus dealt with the person before he dealt with the spirit, because that is the key. That's how you unlock somebody's spirit, to say, look, I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna invite Jesus in. We have to start with relationship, and I think that's so powerful. And maybe real quickly talk about maybe, because it's not always perfect, right? There's not always a success story, even though it really is, because we got to introduce them to Jesus and we got to share a little bit more about who Christ's character is, but it doesn't always end up the way you would hope it would. Talk a little bit about how you deal with that.
Yeah, so it can be kind of difficult because for me, I get emotionally like attached to like everybody that I talk to, because I legitimately become so invested in like their life and how they're doing, because it has become, you know, my passion to share God with people and to see people come to know Christ. So when that, you know, train starts going and the track switches and they kind of go back, starting to revert how they were before, it is incredibly discouraging. But I just have to know that, again, I can't force them on the track that I want them to be on, because that's not, you know, that shouldn't be how it is. And it's just super important to always keep in mind that even if they do stray, like, again, what I say, it could make the difference between their eternity in heaven or in hell. Like, God can use me any way he wants to. He chooses to use me. He doesn't have to. Yeah. So if a person starts walking away, how I kind of cope with that, I guess, is I just start praying, God, if not me, use somebody else to bring them back. And then I just keep praying for them.
That's cool.
Yeah, you have that. You get a lot more invested than I can, and that's a gift, because like it's like I don't wanna get too invested and then rely on me, and then me say something wrong, and then everything goes away. And so I really respect how you can do that, and when need be, walk away. A time that what was your question?
Yeah, just kind of talking about it's not always sunshine and rainbows.
Oh, yeah.
It can be hard sometimes, and how do we deal with negative responses?
Sort of the way that he said that God doesn't need to use specifically us. And I've been shut out. I mean, some people just don't like talking about the topic of Jesus.
Yeah.
And from a bad past or a bad whatever, just knowing that person is, I mean, God still loves that person.
Yeah.
And we both know that God still loves them regardless of how this conversation went, and God's not done with them just because that conversation didn't go well.
Right. That's awesome. I really love this conversation. It seriously felt like drinking from a fire hydrant. Like, you guys said a lot of really cool things that I'm going to take away, and I hope that's true for you guys as well. Is there anything you guys would want to add as we close?
I guess I would just say that, you know, you can't walk into every opportunity expecting somebody to change, because obviously that's typically how I originally think. You know, I walk into somebody who is, you know, facing a lot of challenges. Ideally, I want them to know to God, come to God, but again, that's not always necessarily going to happen. And just being able to accept that, and again, being able to walk away and just pray for them, is something that's incredibly powerful. Like, you can't just, again, you cannot force it on people, because they will resent you from that, and then they'll even like turn away from the church and just everything related to God in general. And that's the complete opposite effect that you want to have.
Right.
So
that's good. That's good.
I'd say knowing your boundaries just from start to finish, because you can't go into a new relationship and be like, oh, you don't know God, you're going to hell.
Yeah.
Like you can't act like that. Because I mean, even in a situation where they don't know God, that's when you get to know them. You get to know why they don't know God. That's what I would do first before you ever say anything like, oh, you don't know God, you're going to hell. So definitely get to know someone before you provide really any spiritual coaching. Just get to know them.
Yeah, and I really like, again, what you even said too about the whole idea of it's not about having a perfect track record, right? Like Jesus didn't even have a perfect track record. You look at the rich young ruler, or the rich young man who said, what do I have to do to enter heaven? He said, sell everything and then follow me. And the guy said no, right? Like, so if Jesus couldn't even do it, we shouldn't expect to do it, right? And,
Yeah.
but it's all about just being faithful. And that's something you guys are. You guys make leading youth group easy. You guys are amazing. So thank you guys for this conversation, and thank you guys for tuning into this episode.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Thrive Show. Our vision at the First Church of Christ is to build thriving homes and thriving spheres, and that can only happen with a thriving relationship with our God. Now, if you want a fun and interactive way to get your household thriving in all those areas, you're definitely going to want to check out this new game that we've created. It's called the Thrive Deck, and it's available now. To play the game, simply draw a card from the deck once a week and do whatever the challenge says. If the challenge doesn't apply to your household, do the option instead. And if the challenge isn't quite challenging enough, then you have a bonus option you could do as well. Each card has a designated challenge based on one of 3 different categories. One focuses on your home. These challenges are designed to help you thrive in your household, whether you live alone or with a spouse or with children. Another category emphasizes your relationship with God by offering new ways to encourage growth in your personal spiritual life. The last category prioritizes your relationships within your personal spheres of influence. These cards might challenge you to step out of your comfort zone with friends, coworkers, or acquaintances and help you all thrive in your relationship with God. So are you up for the challenge? Visit the FCC Welcome Center to purchase yours and keep thriving in your homes and in your spheres.